Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to Workshop Wednesday. The construction of the KV2 diorama continues. We've done the tank, we've done the crew, we've done the ammunition crates with 152mm howitzer shells, and then there's three things left remaining. I have a model kit of captured German soldiers being escorted to the rear. I have to build the actual diorama base itself, and then there are these Soviet soldiers taking a break. Like the crew, like the ammo crates, this is a kit from MiniArt. I think they're a Ukrainian firm, and they really do fantastic model kit accessories like this. Anyway, first things first, get them off the sprues, get them clipped out, get them sanded down, try to remove as many mould lines as possible, get them prepped for painted, fire up the old airbrush, and get them primed. Let's take a quick look at exactly what you get here. So this looks like, well, weapons. A couple of Mosin Nagant rifles, one of them looks like a carbine. What's going on there? Okay, that's the carbine. That is the bolt. Wow. So the rifles are in two parts. The bolt is a separate piece. Holy shit. Looks like we've got a bayonet on there as well. And a couple of ammunition pouches. So, yeah, that's going to be fun, putting together. What do we have here? Again, it looks like another weapon sprue. Next up, accessories. All of these are optional, of course. We've got various different canvas pouches, we've got entrenching tools, we've got grenades, we've got helmets, all kinds of good stuff. We've even got tin cups. Holy shit. Ah, choice of two machine guns. Use them both, use one of them, or don't use any of them. I think I'm probably going to use one. Not quite sure which one yet. And then, of course, the 5 actual soldiers themselves, complete with their bedding rolls, all in their individual poses. So, yep, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, let's get them clipped off the sprues and start getting them sanded down to remove any mould lines. This guy's probably my favourite of the 5 soldiers. I don't know if you can tell from here, but he's only got one of his boots on. Let's have a look at the back of the box and I'll show you exactly which one it is. This is the thing I love about MiniArt stuff, the attention to detail. There he is. He's got one of his boots off and he's just washed the rags that he uses to bind his feet because he doesn't have any socks. He's taking care of his feet during his time off. I love that about these figures. The attention to detail is just astonishingly good. Right, time to get them primed, and I have solved the problem of how to handle and manipulate them while they're in the process of being painted. Got a whole bunch of these crocodile clips on the end of a piece of metal wire. Dirt cheap and absolutely perfect for keeping a hold of the figures while painting. Obviously there's a tiny part that is going to have to be painted separately afterwards, but it beats trying to hold the things with your fingers and risking messing up your paint job and getting paint all over your fingers. The colour I'm using to prime these guys is from the Vallejo Model Air Weathering Effects set. The colour's called Yellow Sand. At some point in the future there's a North African World War II diorama that I want to make. And I went ahead and I bought a Vallejo Model Air Weathering set, and one of the colours included was this yellow sand, which is just about perfect for doing World War II Soviet infantry. Now if you're thinking that crocodile clip looks ingenious, Jingles, but you can't exactly stand it up while the paint's drying, you're going to have to sit there holding on to it. Ah, oh yay of little faith. I bought the crocodile clips specifically because you can do this with them. How good is that? So I can batch paint them all and not have to worry about the ones that are drying. Fantastic. I put 2 coats of primer on because I do like the colour and it was going on extremely thin. And once this guy is finished, this is the last one to receive his 2nd coat of primer. I can just stick him in the block of foam with all of the others. And airbrush paint doesn't take long to dry, so they're only going to be here for a few minutes. The worst thing about using an airbrush is having to clean the airbrush afterwards, and you really do have to clean the airbrush afterwards. To help with that, I've got my hands on this ultrasonic cleaner. Fill it with water, drop the airbrush bits in the tray, zap it with ultrasonic waves, gets it sparkling clean. And I don't just use it for the airbrush. I've cleaned my spectacles, I've cleaned my watch, Rita uses it to clean her jewellery. It's an incredibly useful piece of kit. With airbrush maintenance out of the way, it's time to start base coating the figures. This is the wet palette that I was using last week, by the way. Most of the paint on there is still good to go. That's one of the benefits of using a wet palette. You just don't waste any of your paint. It stayed wet for a week, and it'll probably stay wet for another week. There is some colour separation going on there in one of the greens. You can see that the blue in it is separated out, but you can just mix that right back in with a paintbrush and it will be as good as fresh out of the pot. So to begin with, I like to start in the deepest layers of the model first and work my way up towards the surface. So I'm starting by basing the flesh tones. I'm using Citadel's Bugman's Glow for this. Now, before all of the model snobs start turning their noses up because I'm using Games Workshop paints, there's nothing wrong with Citadel paints. They are very good paints. I'm not a massive fan of the bottles that they come in. I prefer Vallejo's dropper bottles when that sort of thing's concerned, but the paints themselves are pretty damn good. And yes, I'm aware that Vallejo, Army Painter, Scale 75, AK Interactive, MIG Ammo all do very, very good paints as well. But so does Citadel. Most of my airbrush paints are Vallejo Model Air. I've got a couple of specialist items from AK Interactive, mostly chipping agent and heavy chipping agent and various different colours and textures associated with weathering and streaking. But I do have a fairly broad selection, mostly from Vallejo and Citadel. So at the minute we're just applying the base coats. I'm trying to block in all of the base colours, and we're batch painting. So we're doing all of the flesh on all 5 of the figures. And it's a very efficient process. First I do the flesh on all 5 of the figures, then by the time I've finished the 5th, the first one's been dry for ages and I'm ready to start applying the leather base coats to all 5 of the figures, and so on, and so on, and so on. Once the base coats are all applied and dried, it's time to think about adding some shading. So I really do like the Citadel shade paints for this. They've got a nice combination of pigmentation and surface tension. A couple of videos back I made a cheap crack about how these shade paints were nothing more than a fancy wash, and well, they are, but there's a bit more to them than that. You could get an approximation of this effect by watering down some brown paint and slapping it on as a wash, and it would run into and pool in all of the recesses and darken them up a nice brown shade, but it wouldn't do much else. Because you've thinned your paint down with water, water has its own specific viscosity and surface tension. And I don't know what kind of dark alchemical magic is going on inside these pots of shade paint, but you get the same effect in the recesses. This is Agrax Earthshade. It's particularly handy because I can use it to shade the flesh and the uniform fatigues. But I don't know if you've noticed, it's not just running into the recesses. There's enough surface tension there that it's staying on the flat areas and the highlights, and it is changing the colour just a little bit. It's obviously changing the colour more in the recesses because it's flowing into them and pooling in there more. But you are also getting an effect everywhere else, which isn't something that would happen if you were using just a regular brown paint that you'd thin down with water to use as a wash. For the rags that this guy's using to wrap his feet, I was going to paint them white, and then I thought better of it, because white's a very, very harsh colour, and well, I imagine that he's probably washed these a few times. So instead I've painted them in Citadel's Wraithbone, which is a very, very pale cream. And instead of using Agrax Earthshade, I'm using a slightly softer shade. This is Citadel's Sepia shade paint. It's a brown, but it's a softer brown. I don't want them to look dirty because this guy takes care of his feet. He's just washed the rags. But I don't want them to look pristine either because they've seen a fair old bit of use. I don't know how obvious it is, but I am trying to take a slightly more disciplined approach to painting than I have been guilty of before. First I primed everything, then I base coated everything. Now I'm shading everything, and once I'm done shading I'm going to highlight everything and then finish off any details and fix any errors that I made. In the past, I've often gotten carried away. I'll put a base coat on and I think, well, I like the look of that, and I immediately start applying a shade to it before I base coat other areas of the model. Doing it this way certainly feels more efficient. As for whether or not it's going to end up with a better result, well, we'll just have to wait until the end of the video to see. So, I've done all the base painting. I've done all of the shading. Well, I haven't done all of the base painting and all of the shading. One of the guys hasn't had his boots done, but that's easily fixed. This is normally the point where things tend to go horribly, horribly wrong when I'm applying the highlighting and the layers, because I'm just not very good at it. And I was severely tempted to just leave these guys as they are, because, well, maybe I'm just easily impressed, but I was actually quite happy with how they look after just doing the base coating and the shading. So I was extremely tempted to just leave them as they are and then move on and start doing their equipment. But then my conscience got the better of me, because if I don't practice at doing highlighting and layering, I'm never going to get any good at doing highlighting and layering. So this was a fairly tough decision for me, because I am quite happy with how they look. But they could definitely be better. It's just that the process from here on of trying to make them look better is usually where I screw up and make them look absolutely terrible. Still, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And yes, I saw the mould line on the previous figure's leg as well. Yes, I missed it, god damn it, and it's far too late to do anything about it now. Oh well, never mind. So, as I mentioned, I am very, very happy with the way the Agrax Earthshade has changed the colour of the Vallejo Model Air Sand Yellow Primer. What I have to do now is apply some contrast to the highlights. I'm using Citadel's Xandri Dust, which is basically khaki. In fact, you could use Vallejo Game Colour Khaki. It's pretty much exactly the same shade. I actually have some of it. But I'm using the Xandri Dust. Now, when it comes to highlighting, there are two schools of thought. One involves applying the highlights literally just over the highlighted areas. All of the raised surfaces, in particular where light would naturally strike and highlight the figure. The other school of thought says that you should basically reapply the base coat everywhere except for the recesses where the shade paint has pooled and collected the most. When you watch model painting videos on YouTube, I think it's fairly safe to say most people go with the second method and basically reapply the base coat on top of the shade everywhere except for the recesses. And the reason they do this is because it gives you more surface area to apply even finer highlights. You've probably noticed I'm not doing that. Because I'm actually very, very happy with the way the Agrax Earthshade has tinted the fatigues. I mean, they look pretty good. So I'm going with the first option, and I'm just applying the highlight to the raised areas. And I'm putting it on extremely thin as well. It's not quite a glaze, but it almost is. I'm going with the principle here that it's better to add too little than too much, because if you add too little you can always add more. If you add too much you basically have to start again from scratch. Reapply the base coat, reapply the shade, and then start again with the highlighting. So I've watered down that Xandri Dust a lot. Probably too much. Almost to the consistency of a wash. Now I don't want to be applying that straight onto the figure because it is so thin that if I just try to paint it straight over the highlights, it's going to run right off and go into the shadowed areas, and I don't want that. So I'm loading the brush up with the extremely watered down paint, and then I'm dabbing it off on the tissue paper over there to the left. This is removing most of the liquid, so I'm just left with the slightly transparent diluted paint, and well, I suppose this is technically glazing, and I'm applying that. It's not producing much of an obvious effect, but it will take a couple of coats. The benefit of this is that if I fuck it up, it's not going to be nearly as obvious as it would have been if I hadn't been applying such a translucent and watery layer of paint. and it's going to be extremely easy for me to fix any mistakes. This is more time consuming because I'm going to have to apply multiple layers of this very, very thin mixture of Zandri dust or khaki paint, but this is a far, far safer way of doing it if you're not confident in your highlighting skills. Next, equipment, specifically weapons. Here's one of the machine guns. Just to give you an idea of how unbelievably small and fiddly some of these parts are. Trying to get that folding bipod off the sprue without damaging it was a bloody nightmare, but that was simplicity itself compared to the rifle bolt. Yes, the rifle bolts are separate parts. It's still attached to a bit of sprue. Look at that. Why was it necessary for the rifles to come in two separate parts? Well, technically three separate parts, because the spike bayonets are also included. And they're next to impossible to get off the sprue without damaging the spike. It's just ridiculous. But, well, what are you going to do? It is what it is. Oh, actually, we're not quite done. One of the rifles also comes with a side-mounted scope, which I have attached to one of the rifles there. Can you imagine how difficult it was to get that off the plastic sprue without damaging it? It was very difficult. So anyway, the weapons are mostly assembled. I still need to glue the bolts onto most of the rifles, but we're ready to prime them and start painting them. This was an extremely uncomplicated and extremely relaxing part of the process. Nothing fancy going on here, we're just painting the wood brown, slapping a very dark brown shade over it. We're painting the metal bits black, and then we're highlighting them with a metallic shade, and then shading them down with the old skill in a bottle, the Nuln oil. Any kind of black wash will do. None of this is complicated, it's all very simple, but it's very effective. And here is the finished result. First, the accurized version of the Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle, complete with side-mounted scope. Not too bad. Again, you know, it's very, very difficult to screw up the weapons. Next, there's the Carbine version of the rifle. Next to the machine gun. Again, basically just black metal with a metallic highlight and a wooden stock. Now for the figures themselves. I need to be really careful handling these things because I haven't actually varnished them yet. I'm waiting for some AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish to arrive so I can airbrush them with that. But I'm very happy with how these guys have turned out. For once, I actually managed to not completely screw it up when I went through the highlighting stage. I did some of the details off camera, things like the green epaulets and the red star on all of their caps. But pretty much everything else you saw happening on camera. Come on, focus. There it is. This guy's the machine gunner. That's why his hand isn't level with the ground. It's going to be resting on the stock of his machine gun. The olive drab bits I did have a bit of a problem with. Well, not really a problem, but I was never really sure what colour to shade them in. And again, off camera, I went through a whole bunch of different experimental tries on various different pieces of canvas webbing and rucksacks. But eventually settled on, I think it was Nurgling Green with Athonian Camo shading, and it produced a fairly decent result. So that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is the MiniArt Soviet Soldiers Taking a Break kit. A kit of 5 soldiers that came in 127 parts. But I'm extremely happy with how they turned out. These are probably, in fact no, these are definitely the best things I've ever painted. I realise that's not much of a claim, I mean, because I'm just not very good. But I'm definitely getting better. I can see that I'm getting better. You don't have to produce a masterpiece every time you apply paint to a model. but what you should try to do is just do something that was better than the last time you applied paint to a model. And I definitely feel as if I've achieved that here. I had a lot of fun painting these guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching me do it. I feel like they're going to be a fairly tough act to follow, but follow it we shall next week when we're painting the Germans. That's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.